Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm actually going to share a bit of a personal story about my menopause journey, about some of the things that it brought up for me, and mostly I want to really impart some hope on what is on the other side of perimenopause and this whole journey, because I know when I was in the midst of this, that I thought this is how it was going to be forever. And really, what prompted me to record this for you today is I was out running with my dog this morning, and my body feels so good and so well and so free. And it really reminded me that I can never take that for granted, because when I went through perimenopause, I felt the complete opposite of that on so many levels. And I want to share a little bit about my journey through it. And obviously, I'm probably at some degree still in it for a while, but I feel like I can share the story because I went through menopause quite early. I was 46 when I had my last cycle, and then it's 12 months after that we actually shift into menopause. And so that was 47 for me, and I really didn't anticipate it to be at that time. I wasn't thinking that that was what was going on for me, because even just a few years ago, people were not talking about perimenopause and menopause like they are now. It has become enormous. So I don't think I was mentally prepared for what was going on. So I just want to take myself back to that time, or take you back to that time. And there was a lot going on for me. And I feel a little bit vulnerable to share some of the things that were going on, because I've never shared some of these publicly, because I think I feel a real risk of judgment. And I think another reason that I'm recording this for you is because last night in the hatchery, we had a call about judgment, about our own self-judgment, about how we judge others, about the fear of being judged and how it feels to be judged by somebody, and how it really can make us feel like we don't belong, which is such an innate need of ours, to feel like we belong. Something that happened during my perimenopause journey was, do I take you from here? So let's just go back to when I was going through the pinnacle of perimenopause. I'm going to paint a picture of what was happening and why I kind of missed that I was in full-blown menopause. So I was in lockdown at that time. So it was a really strict lockdown here in New Zealand, which meant we couldn't do anything apart from go to the supermarket. We weren't allowed to do anything else socially. We weren't allowed to see anybody else. So we were very much isolated and stuck at home. I was running a program at the time with about 20 something women that I was taking them through one of my programs. I was doing homeschooling, and I was navigating one of the biggest challenges of my life, which was to choose not to be vaccinated in that time. And I just really want you to pause and feel your judgment. Last night, we talked about judgment and how it feels to be judged. And I think for me, choosing not to be vaccinated, although it was quite a private thing, I don't think I've ever felt so much judgment about my choice, and even self-judgment as to whether that was the right choice, because I know even now sharing this, you're going to change your opinion of me. Some of you are. Some of you might even unfollow me. And that was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, because I actively chose not to belong. And that is incredibly risky for our survival, to choose something that makes us an outsider. And I really only learned that through the experience of doing that. And people assumed that I was vaccinated. So they talked to me like I would agree with them. And they said things like, unvaccinated people should die in the corner of hospitals. Unvaccinated people are missing part of their brain. They are so stupid. I mean, I had everything that could have been said. And I really felt the impact of that because that was me. And on top of that, I'm an incredibly social, connected person. And I got ousted from a lot of things. And I chose to be honest about it, and I just stepped back from a lot of things because I wasn't vaccinated. So here in New Zealand, not being vaccinated, you weren't allowed to, even when the rules loosened, you weren't allowed to go into cafes, you weren't allowed to go inside restaurants, and you had to sit outside. And that feeling of being an outsider, I mean, why I'm talking about this alongside menopause is because it was deeply stressful to my nervous system to be cut off socially and to feel like I was a really bad person in society, like I didn't care about other people when I deeply care about the well-being of other people and myself, which was part of the reason I chose that, but I don't want to go into that. And one of the things that really tipped me over the edge in terms of my resilience was my exercise group did outdoor fitness, and it was like, yes, I can do this. We're a group exercising outside. We're allowed to do this. And this is my lifeline to connecting with other women and to, movement and the things that I love in a really heavy time of COVID. And that woman running that chose to not have unvaccinated people in the outdoor fitness. So I put my hand up and said, okay, I can't come. And that one was really painful for me. I remember coming home and just crying my eyes out after that decision because I just felt such a deep sense of not belonging. I'm just painting the picture that when I was going through perimenopause, there was a lot of other layers that put me into an incredibly stressful state of being. And maybe that's what expedited things for me. I don't know. My mother went through menopause later than this, so I don't know why I have. And there's lots of theories about being healthy and all of these things. And I consider myself somebody who's really cared for my body, and I've really cared for my mind in terms of doing work. But anyway, it happened, and I just want to acknowledge that it was an incredibly stressful time, and what that resulted in was, at the end of that year, coming out of that lockdown, having all of the brutalities of what you got punished with in New Zealand if you weren't vaccinated, and all the little things and comments and all of this meant that I went into a really heavy, dark place in myself. We went away on holiday, and on that holiday, my family would go inside and and sit in the cafes, and I would sit outside and wait. And little did I know that I was in the absolute throngs of menopause. It was actually that month that was my very last period, my last cycle. So there was a lot, and I don't know at times whether it was the perimenopause, whether it was the lockdown, whether it was feeling like I didn't belong, but it was a really, really heavy, hard place that actually at some points I was like to my husband, I just don't know if I want to carry on. I remember saying that on our holiday. And because I am such an upbeat, positive, resilient, really strong person, it was really, really hard for him to take that seriously. And at the same time, him and I were spiraling in that quite a heavy place. Okay. So I was looking back in the throngs of perimenopause. I feel like I lost all of my buffer in terms of how I emotionally responded to James. And it just meant that anything that he did, and we were in lockdown, just felt very irritating. I would snap at little things that he did. I remember even complaining about, oh, you're always doing the dishes, and like, why do you have to always do the dishes? Like, seriously, the minutia of things that were triggering me were really out of proportion. And this is something that happens to us when we're in perimenopause. Our mood regulation and our ability to emotionally regulate gets incredibly challenged. And what I know now is that scientifically, what is happening is we have these estrogen receptors in our brain, and the highest density of emotional receptors live in the amygdala, right? So that is the mood regulating part of our brain that lives in the limbic brain. So we are reducing the estrogen in our body. So we are changing the flow of what's happening to those estrogen receptors in the amygdala. Okay, that's like our place that is like it's scanning for, is the world safe? Do I need to respond in fight or flight? So just to give you the science of what's happening and why we lose our buffer and why we can't regulate our mood in the same way that we used to, is because we have less estrogen, and that is impacting these incredibly important parts of our brain. It's also the hippocampus, which has some other functions around emotional regulation. There's estrogen receptors there. So our whole brain is changing, and we are wondering why we find it irritating that our husband even breathes or our children do this, or whoever else. If you don't, it's everything becomes more irritating to us. So I know I've kind of gone a long way around with my story of COVID, of perimenopause, of really hitting rock bottom, but there was a lot of neurobiological changes happening for me in an already stressful time. So what was showing up for me at that time was my body was in a lot of pain. I would wake up and my joints really hurt. And that's because, there's estrogen receptors basically all over our body that is helping us to feel good. And when we reduce that estrogen, things show up in our body. And yeah, I'm not a scientist or a doctor or somebody who really is advising on the science of that, but I had this neck pain for, at least 6 months, and it was debilitating. And I went to try to get it fixed, and there's just no answer. And now I kind of understand it was just a lot of it was from joint pain, from not having enough estrogen in my body, or having changing levels of estrogen in my body. And I remember waking up feeling like I was 100 some mornings. Like, as somebody who lives for being an energetic being, who is somebody who has always leapt out of bed on full beam, this was so hard for me to accept. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is what my life is going to be like. This is how age feels in my body. And it was really frightening to even contemplate that this could be how I'm going to feel. This is the energy. My energy just felt so depleted. My joints hurt. Of course, I had, hot flushes here and there, and my sleep was different, and, hot, cold, all of these things. So it was, I guess, why I wanted to create this message for you is that it is not going to stay like that. Okay, this is a transition phase, and there is incredible solutions, and there is a rebalancing that happens. So my words really would be just, this too shall pass. So James and I were in a bit of a spiral together. He was not in a great place after the 4-month lockdown, and probably not in a great place living with me, who was really kind of going from 0 to 100 at any moment about reacting to things that in other phases of my life I would have just let go. So it was very unpredictable for him living with me. I think in this time it was like a little condensed incubator of life, and of course I was missing a lot of my joy because I didn't have my social connection, but also my hormones were all over the place. And we really came together. And I remember the end of the year, New Year's Eve, we had this walk down the farm, and we were about to go away for a while, and we just had this huge come to Jesus moment. And I think it was the first time I felt like, wow, this is risky business that we're in as a couple here. Like, for the first time ever, I feel like James has really had enough of me. And I had kind of always just assumed that James would desire me and want to be with me. But I also, somewhere deep in me, knew that the way that I was showing up was really undesirable. And I knew that in myself. And I think he was very flat. I was flat. And yeah, I just remember I just cried, and it was a really strange way to kind of end a year that had been a really taxing year. And we went on our own paths of finding the answers for ourselves. And I really hope, I've asked James lots of times to come on the podcast and share his story, because he started cycling in lockdown and really shifted his mental health and his weight. Like, he lost weight and stopped drinking and as much, and just really realigned himself in that time. And I'd love him to share his story. But I know that I was a big contributor to, the weight that he was carrying going through that perimenopause phase. So he also discovered Mankind, which is an incredible personal development work with men. Maybe that came a bit later. I can't remember. Anyway, he was on his path. And for me, I was like, I need to shift the state that I'm in, physically, emotionally, spiritually, for myself, for my marriage, for my family, because I'm not showing up as my best person. And I feel really out of alignment and a lot of self-judgment, because I should know better, because I've done this work and I'm a coach. And why am I still having these emotional reactions, and why am I not feeling the life force that I stand for? So a few different things happened that really helped me personally. I went into this IFS work, which is the internal family systems work, and I really trained in that. And I think anything that's helping you to understand your blind spots, or helping you to get to the root cause of why we react like we do, is really, really powerful going through this transition time. One thing that I do not stand for, and one comment that somebody made to me when I was in the throngs of my perimenopause, is that they said, your symptoms are all your unhealed trauma, right? And that was so unhelpful for me, because first of all, it's pathologizing something that is a scientific change hormonally in your body. Like I said, we know that in the brain, we have these estrogen receptors that are affecting our mood. And we know that there is science to show that when women go through perimenopause and their estrogen levels drop, they are more prone to anxiety and depression, okay, because of what's happening from a hormonal level. So we can work with our hormones, right? And we can adjust those and help our mood regulate. But to pathologize a woman and tell her that what you're experiencing is because you haven't done the work to heal your trauma, I personally really don't agree with. And I think it's dangerous, because it's another layer you're putting on somebody to say, oh, there's something wrong or broken about you that you're having these experiences. And I see it happen with women who have fertility issues, and people say, oh, it's your unhealed trauma that you're not getting pregnant. And yes, I stand for healing trauma, and I know that there is lots of ways that trauma shows up, but there is also scientific and medical reasons why we feel like we do. And I want to put the and in there because we can explore the trauma, and healing our trauma is going to help everything, every way that we respond in the world. But equating trauma with your menopause symptoms, I personally don't condone, because I think women are carrying enough. And it's interesting that when we actually up our estrogen levels, that those symptoms can alleviate. What I do know is that if you've experienced trauma, your window of tolerance is smaller, which means your ability to stay calm and connected and regulated is smaller. So what that means is you will flip into those fight or flight or freeze modes more easily if you haven't healed your trauma. So that means you will flip into more anxiety or depression or stuckness or any of those things if you haven't healed some trauma. So we're wanting to expand our window of tolerance, but it's not the sole reason that you're experiencing your menopause symptoms. But for me, I did take that opportunity to really dive into in my internal family to understand why my parts showed up like they did. Why am I feeling this anger? What is that anger representing? What is it trying to protect? Why do I have a part that is controlling? Why do I have a part that feels this worry? And another part that showed up for me that's really was a new part in that perimenopause journey was really questioning myself, and my confidence about things definitely dropped. And I've never really noticed that before. Of course, there's situations where I don't feel confident, but that kind of self-doubt part was a really new feeling for me. And that is, it's a common feeling as women that we get during perimenopause. So that was interesting. And now I just want to say that that's not there anymore again. So yeah, so I worked on IFS. That was one of the things. And training to become a practitioner in that, I also needed to have a therapist so that I could work through my stuff. And I found that to be an incredible support, to just have somebody to talk through some of these feelings. And the other thing that I'm really big on, and if you're working with me and living with purpose, you know that this is such a big part. It's actually allowing ourselves to fully be and feel these emotions, because, you know, we aren't always proud of those big emotions or those shutdown emotions or whatever they are. And we try to avoid them. So feeling the emotions and being with it. And I remember at that lowest point that I mentioned away on holiday, that I just spent time walking by myself, letting myself cry, letting myself feel the grief, and the grief of also losing, yeah, some parts of myself in that time. It's interesting now on reflection, you know, we often as women really don't like our cycle, or we find it annoying. You know, some of us really embrace the cycle and use it. But what I would say is, like, when you don't have a cycle anymore, you just, for me, I felt like, wow, it's a real grieving of losing part of my youth and just losing my, you know, fertile years. And it's kind of sad. So if you are at the end of that, maybe just really embrace your cycle, because I hear a lot of people talking about working with their cycle and how do we show up at certain times of our cycle, when should we rest. I mean, I would really invite you to honor your cycle while you have it, because I definitely really just miss a lot of things about it. And I know that might sound weird, because a lot of people are like, it's awesome, I never have to have that. But I know for some of you it's very painful and uncomfortable, but there's a grieving process of losing that, definitely. So yeah, I did IFS. I had IFS therapy. I really sat with my emotions and felt them, and that really helped me to regulate myself. And it's also probably why I've become so passionate about emotional regulation and how do we work with that. I also decided to go on HRT, and there might be some judgment again that comes up with that. I felt like that really quickly shifted things for me personally. I just felt like my old self again. And I think one of the things that we go through when we are in perimenopause, well, for me personally, is that I just didn't feel like myself. That's the only way I could describe it. I was like, this just doesn't feel like me. I don't know who I am. I don't know who this person is, but it doesn't feel like me. And once I topped up my estrogen again, a lot of things changed. I felt more like my old self again. I felt like my energy in my body felt more like my old self again. I slept well. There's a lot of things that came back into alignment for me, alongside a lot of other things that I was doing. So that personally for me was really positive, and it might not be for everybody. I did come off it for about 3 or 4 months more recently just to see, and my body still felt really good. So maybe that's also something just to say is like, once you're in menopause, like your body will return to how it felt, and your mood and things. It's not forever, those feelings. So it was a really good test for me to know that I am back to my normal self again, or whatever normal is. I'm back to a part that feels familiar to me. And what I would say about that is I decided to go back on to HRT, even though I felt okay off it, mainly because of the research that's being done. So, one of the reasons that I went back on is actually based on the research of Lisa Mosconi, who is the menopause doctor, I think she calls herself. And if you want to hear more about her, she's on the Diary of a CEO podcast, and she talks a lot about the changing brain in menopause, and she really speaks into how the markers for Alzheimer's really show up in this midlife time, in this perimenopause time, where we have changes in our estrogen and estrogen receptors, and that the reduction of estrogen can impact Alzheimer's later in life. And she is very pro on maintaining those estrogen levels, whether it's through HRT or another source, so that we can future proof our brain and memory as women for the future. So I think that's one of the reasons that I probably have continued on, because now is the time basically for that change to happen in the brain. So yeah, that's another thing that I did. I've really consciously increased my protein intake. I think, I'm mostly vegetarian. I do eat some fish, but throughout my life, I think I've been very low on protein. But I know as we lose muscle mass and bone density and things, that I'm really focusing on increasing my protein levels. And in turn, I've always been somebody who has enjoyed the gym and weight, but I'm really more conscious of upping my weights and making sure that's part of my week, as part of my plan for being in this phase of menopause. Those are some of the things that have helped me. Doing the deeper work definitely helps. Doing the IFS, internal family systems, where we get to understand these big emotional reactions, and why I love working with women in midlife is because I work a lot on these big emotional reactions, and I have been through that myself. And maybe that's the blessing of me going through perimenopause quite early and supplementing with HRT. For me, there is so many other ways of doing that. going to see a great menopause doctor or coach. Sarah Acklin in my membership is great. She's the menopause coach. She gives you a lot of practical things of how you can eat and supplements you can take to support this journey if you maybe want to try that route. Physically looking after my body through weights, through protein, through getting outside, doing meditation, all of the things as well that help regulate me, movement and breathing and nature and joy and connection. These are all really important things that have helped me navigate this time. I don't know what might resonate and again, what might not. And I've kind of really shared my whole story here. But if this did resonate with you, maybe send me an email or share it with a friend who's maybe going through this, who feels like they're going to be stuck here and this is it. Just knowing that there is hope and that you will move through this time. If you're not in this phase yet, how awesome that you're listening to this and being prepared. I wished that I had been more aware of being in perimenopause. For me, I was still breastfeeding when I was 40. I'd had a baby at 39, my second baby. So my brain was not at all in a place of thinking that I might be in perimenopause. It was quite a few years later, but our perimenopause can start in our late 30s, early 40s, and last many, many years to our late 40s and 50s. So the awareness is such a big part of this. But thank you for listening, and I would love to hear from you if this does resonate, or please do share. Have a beautiful day.